New Hampshire wants to charge heroin dealers with second-degree murder in the case of fatal overdoses. State Attorney General Joseph Foster has announced opioid overdoses are ballooning across the country. Federal prosecutors who have the leverage to charge the dealers in the cases of fatal overdoses under the Controlled Substance Act are now taking harsher stances across the country. New Hampshire has a growing heroin and fentanyl problem, yet critics are saying that charging the dealers with murder could simply backfire. Well, one of the cases that's hitting the headlines at the moment is Amanda Burgess. She's 27 years old. She's being charged, she's facing criminal charges for the death of Joseph Cahill. She sold him $40 worth of fentanyl. Now, fentanyl, just to explain, it's a synthetic opioid. People, especially in New Hampshire, they're finding are using it more and more in place of heroin. It's cheaper, but it's 30 to 50 times more powerful and hence dangerous. She sold him this drug. He obviously overdosed. He died. She's facing charges under a drug statute known as death resulting, and she could be put in jail for life. Now, the State Attorney General, Joseph Foster, he's come out and he's announced that he actually wants to put even harsher laws in place, and he wants to see people in the future facing similar charges be looking at second-degree murder. Do you think that this could possibly solve the problem, this growing epidemic we have of heroin in this country?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. It's a difficult one to see how they're actually going to prove this. So second-degree murder is first-degree murder, obviously you have to have malice aforethought, so there needs to be intent to cause the death of somebody. Second-degree murder, that standard is slightly lower, and it's about having an indifference, or negligence, sufficient negligence, or grossly negligence, or indifference to the value of human life, and your actions directly caused the death of somebody. So whilst on some level that test might be satisfied by the sale of a toxic substance, an illegal substance, in the way that this case happened, it's not a weapon, and there's no guarantee that by selling an illegal street drug, potent or not, it's going to therefore lead to that chain of events that will cause the death of somebody. So whilst those deaths are tragic and awful, and overdose deaths are tragic, I don't think that this would stand up to the test. I don't think this is going to be something that's going to be workable, nor do I think it's going to actually resolve the problem.
So, well, 399 people died in New Hampshire last year of overdoses. So this obviously is being put in place to deter the people that give those people the drugs. Sure. It's to obviously put fear that they're basically, you know, acknowledging that they are potentially murdering someone. Right. But you're saying in terms of the physical practicality, you don't think it will deter people. Well,
yeah, as a point of law, I think it's, sorry, just to ensure, I think as a point of law, it's going to be problematic. Because although in certain instances bartenders have been held liable, have been charged with the death of their customers, that's when they've been held to be liable and charged with the death, that's been on a manslaughter charge, which is very, very different from the criteria and the standard that's applied to a second-degree murder. So I think by extension it's going to be very, very difficult to prove that as a point of law. And even if it were possible, I just don't think it's going to be a sufficient deterrent. I don't think it's workable. I don't think it's the right way to go. I think the right way to go, and we can get into this, is why they have such an uptick in this epidemic, as you said, in New Hampshire in particular, why there's such an uptick in heroin overdoses and heroin usage, and it comes from prescription drugs.
It does. To speak to your point, you know, we have people talking about how hopefully if you do charge someone with second-degree murder, it can deter the dealers. But to your point, that's one link in the chain. It's the lowest link in the chain. It's the sort of the easiest link. And to blame the last people in the chain when obviously it's the big pharma that were responsible for putting things like OxyContin on the market and pushing them in such a way to get people addicted. And then we had New Hampshire come out and just clamp down on prescription drugs, almost forcing these people who now have an addiction to turn to the streets and to find other alternatives. Really, you know, if we're going to be putting people up for murder left, right, and center in this kind of way, should it be the last, lowest, easiest link in the chain? Right. These drug dealers on the street, we see this 27-year-old girl who, yes, has done a criminal thing. Yes, she's done a wrong thing, but presumably because she didn't have any money and she thought this was an easy way to earn a little bit of money, whereas it's obviously the big pharma that have a moral responsibility not to push drugs that can lead to this kind of death in the long run. Fentanyl fentanyl, though, it's really becoming a big problem, especially in New Hampshire. They're discovering it more and more and more. So they are saying that if we, for example, do find a dealer that's particularly pushing a drug like fentanyl over and over again, which we now know is 50 more times as powerful as heroin, they're saying they will go after that dealer in a harsh way. And I do want to also point out that we do hear stories time and time again of dealers, heroin dealers in particular, pushing and targeting people and trying to get them addicted in order to earn their own money. So there definitely is criminal charges.
Sure,
and,
of course,
yes.
of course. Listen, they're drug dealers. I mean, we're not trying to sanitize it in any particular way. They're drug dealers. So in lots of ways, they are pariahs of society. They prey on the weak. They prey on addicts. They do all of these things. But there are effective laws that are in place. And there are criminal activities. It's illegal what they do. There's criminal activities. There's criminal provisions in place to prosecute, charge, and successfully prosecute them as for drug offences. And those are very harsh sentences. But to try to inflate it to the point where they're actually going to be charged for second-degree murder, I think is a bridge too far. And as I said, I think it's ultimately counterproductive. I think the harder reality, the harsher task is to look at the socioeconomic reasons why there's an uptick. So rather than trying to do it, as you said, from the bottom down, we look at it from the top up, and it's looking at those pharmaceutical companies that have been pushing and urging people to take these opiates as for pain-killing purposes, and then once they and then unfortunately they're very addictive and they get addicted to them, and then they can no longer afford them and they no longer prescribe them, and then they turn to other drugs. And it's not only looking at those pharmaceutical companies that have a responsibility and need to be held to account for that, but also then at the underlying socioeconomic reasons as to why people are then turning to street drugs. So to hit the drug dealers, it sounds glamorous, it sounds like you're being tough on crime, but I think ultimately it's counterproductive.
Well, there's been plenty of talk about ramping down on the war of drugs. Certainly a move like this would go in the opposite direction. Also in terms of prisons, prison overflowing, this would only presumably put people like drug dealers in prison for longer. Yet obviously this heroin epidemic, it's really getting out of control in this country. People are desperate to find a way to control it. And the State Attorney General in New Hampshire, he is suggesting that charging drug dealers for second-degree murder could possibly be the answer.